"Daniel, we're restructuring," Victoria said, her face perfectly still on the video call. "Today is your last day." I stared at the woman who had been division president for less than 4 months. For 6 years, I had built our largest client relationship from the ground up. I had created the strategy behind the $420 million contract sitting days away from a final decision. Yet Victoria spoke as if she were canceling a routine meeting. "There is one alternative," she continued. "You can stay as a mailroom clerk. Frankly, that's about the level where your talents belong." The human resources director lowered his eyes. Victoria leaned back, waiting for me to protest, beg, or remind her how much of the company's future rested on work I had led. Instead, I smiled. "Thank you for the generous offer." Her eyebrows lifted. "But I'll decline." 2 hours later, a security guard stood beside my office while I packed photographs, notebooks, and the coffee mug my team had given me after we rescued a collapsing project 3 years earlier. Nobody explained what I had supposedly done wrong. They didn't need to. Victoria had already started telling senior staff that my performance had become unreliable and that the restructuring was necessary to protect the upcoming contract. As I carried the box through the hallway, office doors stayed half-closed. People I had mentored stared at their screens. One colleague quietly whispered, "I'm sorry," but looked away before Victoria could see him. Then I reached my old office. My nameplate was already gone. Inside, Victoria's longtime associate was sitting behind my desk, reviewing the presentation materials I had created for the $420 million meeting. Victoria stood beside him. "We'll manage," she said as I passed. "The client hired the firm, Daniel, not you." I didn't answer. She had always believed the company logo was the reason clients returned. She never understood why executives called my personal number during emergencies, or why I had spent nights at damaged sites before anyone from leadership arrived. I placed the box in my car and started the engine. Before I could pull away, my phone vibrated. The message came from Michael Grant, CEO of Victoria's biggest competitor. I hadn't spoken to him in months. "I heard what happened. We should talk." 3 days later, Victoria entered the client's executive boardroom, expecting to finalize the largest contract in company history. Then she stopped. I was already sitting across the table, wearing Michael's company badge. But what made the color leave Victoria's face wasn't seeing me there. It was realizing every client executive in the room was looking at me instead of her. "Why?" I entered Grant Infrastructure's headquarters the morning after Michael's message with one condition already fixed in my mind. "I won't discuss Victoria's proposal, pricing, internal documents, or anything protected by my former employment," I told the executives seated across from me. Michael nodded. "That's exactly why we called you." Their legal counsel slid a folder toward me. "We want your experience," she said, "not their information." For the next 2 hours, they questioned me about compliance, confidentiality, and the boundaries of what I could legally contribute. I answered everything directly. When they asked how I understood the client's priorities so well, I didn't mention private files. I told them about the night a structural failure shut down one of the client's facilities, and I drove 4 hours through a storm before Victoria even answered her phone. I told them about the emergency redesign that saved a 6-month delay. I told them how I had stood in front of furious executives and accepted responsibility for mistakes made above me, because protecting the project mattered more than protecting my title. Michael studied me quietly. "So Victoria took credit for those recoveries." "Usually." "And you never corrected her." "I thought the client knew who did the work." "They did." That afternoon, Victoria gathered her leadership team and dismissed concerns about my departure. "Daniel followed instructions," she said. "He didn't create the strategy. Anyone competent can deliver it." Her associate, now sitting in my office, assured everyone the final presentation required no changes. Victoria accepted that because admitting otherwise would mean admitting she had fired the one person who understood the client beyond the numbers. Late that evening, my phone rang. The number belonged to the client's procurement director. He skipped every greeting. "If Grant Infrastructure wins," he asked, "will you personally lead the delivery?" I looked toward Michael, who was standing across the conference room. "Yes," I said carefully, "but only if everything stays completely above board." The director exhaled. That was the only answer we needed. The executive boardroom overlooked the city skyline, but no one paid attention to the view. Representatives from both firms took their seats, while the client's leadership team reviewed the agenda in silence. Victoria walked in with the confidence of someone who believed the decision had already been made. She smiled at executives she had known for years. "Good morning," she said warmly. Several returned polite nods. None of them stood to greet her. I noticed the change immediately. 3 days earlier, she would have been the center of every conversation. Today, the room felt carefully distant. The procurement director closed the door. "Before we begin," he said, "we'd like to hear Grant Infrastructure's proposed delivery approach." Victoria frowned. I assumed we'd be presenting first. "You'll both have equal time," he replied. "Mr. Carter, whenever you're ready." Every head turned toward me. I stood and walked to the front of the room. Instead of discussing confidential knowledge from my former employer, I focused on publicly available project requirements, proven risk management methods, and the leadership structure our team would use to respond to emergencies. "Our priority," I said, "is transparency. Every major decision will have direct executive accountability, and the client will never have to wonder who owns a problem." Several client executives exchanged approving looks. Halfway through my presentation, Victoria abruptly pushed back her chair. "This is inappropriate," she said sharply. "Daniel built these relationships while employed by my company. He's leveraging connections that belong to us." The room fell silent. She looked directly at the procurement director. "How can you allow someone to profit from relationships we paid him to develop?" Before I could answer, the procurement director calmly spoke. "Mr. Carter has complied with every legal and ethical requirement following his departure." Victoria opened her mouth again. "But—" "No," another executive interrupted. The client's chief operating officer folded his hands on the table. "There's something your own leadership deserves to hear." He looked toward the executives sitting behind Victoria. 4 months ago, we privately informed Ms. Langford that Mr. Carter's continued leadership was a significant factor in our confidence to execute this modernization program. Several people behind Victoria stared at her. One vice president blinked in disbelief. "You never shared that with us." Victoria's expression hardened. "The project has never depended on one individual." The chief operating officer slowly shook his head. "That wasn't our assessment." A heavy silence settled over the room. Victoria's own executives avoided looking at her. The procurement director closed his notebook. "Before this committee reaches its decision," he said, "there is one final matter we must address." He turned toward me. "Mr. Carter, please remain seated." Then he reached into a leather portfolio and removed a sealed envelope marked confidential. Without saying another word, he slid it across the polished conference table until it stopped directly in front of Victoria. Every eye in the room fixed on the envelope. No one reached for the envelope. For several long seconds, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Finally, the procurement director spoke. "Please open it, Ms. Langford." Victoria broke the seal with noticeably unsteady hands. Inside was a packet of meeting summaries, email confirmations, and signed records from the previous 6 months. As she flipped through the pages, the color slowly drained from her face. The first document summarized a private executive meeting. Recommendation: Daniel Carter should remain project lead throughout the procurement process to ensure continuity and minimize delivery risk. The second contained Victoria's written acknowledgement that she had received the recommendation. The third documented another meeting where the client again expressed concern about leadership instability. Victoria had acknowledged that warning as well. Yet she had fired me anyway. One of her own vice presidents leaned forward. I've never seen any of these. Neither had the operations director beside him. Victoria swallowed. I intended to discuss them after the bid. The procurement director answered quietly. Instead, you assured your own leadership that leadership continuity wasn't important to us. No one defended her. Michael stood. For complete transparency, he said, Mr. Carter did not contact our company seeking this opportunity. He nodded toward me. We contacted him after learning he had been terminated. The procurement director confirmed it immediately. That is correct. Another client executive added. We were concerned when we learned the individual who had personally guided every critical phase of this project had been removed without explanation. I connected my laptop to the screen. Our delivery model, I said, was built entirely after I joined Grant Infrastructure. I walked the committee through a redesigned execution strategy based on lessons learned from publicly documented infrastructure projects, independent research, and my own professional experience accumulated over nearly 2 decades. There wasn't a single confidential document from my former employer. Only better leadership planning. When the committee began asking technical questions, Victoria nodded toward the executive who had replaced me. He stood confidently. His confidence lasted less than a minute. He stumbled over scheduling assumptions. He couldn't explain why certain inspection milestones had been structured the way they were. When asked how emergency decision-making would be coordinated across multiple regions, he searched through presentation slides that offered no answer. The committee members quietly made notes. No one interrupted him. No one rescued him. For the first time since she became division president, Victoria seemed to understand what she had actually lost. It had never been my job title. It had never been the company logo on my business card. It had been years of earned credibility that couldn't be transferred with an office or a promotion. Just as the procurement committee left the room to make its final decision, Victoria's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. Her expression immediately changed. It was a message from her company's board chair. Please remain after today's announcement. We need to speak with you immediately. Victoria slowly lowered the phone. She already knew this meeting was no longer just about a contract. 25 minutes later, the procurement committee returned. No one spoke as they took their seats. The procurement director placed a folder on the table and looked at representatives from both companies. Thank you for your professionalism throughout this process, he began. After completing our evaluation, the committee has reached a unanimous decision. Victoria sat perfectly still. Her replacement clasped his hands together so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The contract for the Infrastructure Modernization Program, valued at $420 million, is awarded to Grant Infrastructure. No applause followed. The moment was too significant. The procurement director continued before anyone could react. We want the reasoning to be absolutely clear. He opened another document. Pricing between both firms was competitive. He turned a page. Technical capability was also comparable. Another page. The deciding factor was leadership credibility. He looked directly at Victoria. For 6 years, Daniel Carter consistently demonstrated transparency, accountability, and responsiveness during every major challenge we faced. Our confidence was built through his actions, not marketing presentations. The chief operating officer spoke next. when we learned Mr. Carter had been terminated without explanation, and after discovering our repeated concerns had never been communicated to your leadership. We no longer had confidence in your company's decision-making." Victoria's shoulders sank. She knew there was nothing left to argue. As executives began leaving the room, she quietly walked toward me. For the first time since I had met her, she looked uncertain. "Daniel." I turned. "I made a mistake. I waited. I underestimated your value." Those words would have meant everything a week earlier. Now they sounded empty. "Our board is going to ask questions," she continued. "If I reverse the restructuring, if I bring you back as senior director, would you consider returning?" I couldn't help remembering the video call. The cold expression. The mailroom offer. The certainty that I was disposable. I smiled politely. "You already showed me exactly what you thought I was worth." She lowered her eyes. "I know. You offered me a mailroom position." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. "Thank you," I said calmly, "but I've already accepted a future where my work is respected." I walked away without looking back. 3 weeks later, Victoria's board concluded its investigation. Internal emails revealed she had deliberately described my performance as declining despite years of outstanding evaluations. Meeting records proved she had concealed multiple client warnings from senior leadership because admitting them would have exposed the risk of replacing me. Witnesses confirmed she bypassed normal restructuring procedures to install her longtime associate in my position. The findings were impossible to ignore. Victoria was removed as division president. Her preferred executive resigned shortly afterward, unable to survive the scrutiny surrounding the failed transition. Inside the company, the restructuring became a leadership case study about the cost of ignoring expertise in favor of personal loyalty. Several former coworkers reached out to me. Some apologized for believing the rumors. Others admitted they had been too afraid to challenge Victoria while she was in power. I accepted every apology. Holding on to resentment would not change what had happened. Meanwhile, Grant Infrastructure promoted me to Executive Vice President of Strategic Infrastructure Partnerships. Instead of rebuilding my reputation, I was building something much more valuable, a culture where people earned recognition through integrity instead of politics. The modernization project moved forward successfully because decisions were made openly, problems were addressed immediately, and trust was treated as the company's most important asset. Looking back, I realized losing my job had never been the greatest loss in the story. The greatest loss belonged to the leader who believed authority could replace credibility. She thought titles created loyalty. She thought relationships belonged to the company. She thought the person who quietly solved problems could always be replaced. She was wrong. The last time I saw Victoria was across a conference hall several months later. She looked away first. I didn't, because I no longer needed her approval to measure my worth. Sometimes the most valuable thing a person can lose is the opportunity to keep taking someone for granted. And that was something she would never get back.